With the NFL season now officially more than half over, it's now time to start looking at potential playoff scenarios, and it's now also time to start thinking about, could the Lions actually pull it off? Could they perhaps make the biggest surprise against the NFC? We're going to talk about it in today's episode, folks, so stay tuned. It started with an owner who had a last name fans despised, hiring a coach that the experts thought was crazy.
But I got a plan, I swear to you.
Who traded for a QB that was said to be washed up. They said the Detroit Lions would never amount to anything, that it would always be the same old Lions. But this team, our team, has a new identity, defined and expressed by the crazy head coach.
Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes, I will beat your ass.
Led by the QB that nobody thought was good. Motor City Mania is in full swing and ready to start. So join the show and be prepared for kneecap biting, because Motor City Mania starts right now. Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and we're diving in right now. As always, to those that are coming back to the show, I just want to say thank you all for coming back. Thank you all for your view, your support, your patience. Thank you all for everything that you do. And to those that are tuning into the show for the very first time, I would just want to say thank you all for giving my show a shot. Welcome on in. I hope you enjoy the content, and I also hope to gain your subscription if I've earned and deserved it. And with that, to everybody, I just want to say God bless. Hope you enjoyed the content, and let's dive in. So here's the thing, folks. When we take a look at what's going on so far in the NFL this year, there's a lot of contention right now for both AFC and NFC. Like, the playoff race is really starting to heat up. There are teams that are right on the bubble. They're trying to get into that playoff race. They're trying to get one of those 7 seeds to get into the playoff hunt. And then there are others that are really, really comfortable. They're up there in the 1, 2, 3 seed. They seem like everything's going their way. Well, when we're talking about the Lions this year, the Lions are definitely in that top seeding category because they're actually the number 2 seed currently in the NFC. And if you think about it, with the Lions being 7-2 with their record on the year, they're arguably having one of the best starts that they've ever had in franchise history. I mean, the Lions are just doing so immensely well right now. However, the Lions being at 7-2, they're obviously not content. They want to keep winning. They want to keep stacking those W's. They want to make sure that they have the best possible chance, the best possible likelihood, if you will, to secure that number 1 seed in the NFC. Why is that the case? Well, the reason why is if a team secures the number 1 seed in either conference, they get home advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs, and they're the only team that gets a bye week going into the playoffs. It's not like the old system anymore, the old playoff brackets where you'd have 2 teams that would have bye weeks before all the wild card games were done. Now there's only one team, which is the number 1 seed. So, here's the thing though. The real question that we have to ask, the real question that we Lions fans need to start considering as these games start stacking up and we start getting later and later into the season, because now we're in the stretch. Now we're going to start getting into that point where these games, 1, they really matter, more so than what they have in the past, but also number 2, how other teams are doing in contention with us for that NFC number 1 seed are also going to greatly matter. So the question is, can the Lions actually do it? Can the Lions actually take the number 1 seed away from the only team realistically that, in my opinion, has the other outside shot or the greatest shot to get that number 1 seed is the one that currently has it, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, like I said, the Lions are currently the number 2 seed in the NFC conference, so it's not like they're super far out of reach. If you think about it, the Lions are only 1 game removed from the Philadelphia Eagles in terms of total win-loss record. And again, since they're the number 2 seed, they have a pretty good shot of actually making a push, actually making a run to get that number 1 seed. Now, the real thing we need to start thinking about here is the dynamics, is the potential scenarios that could potentially lead us into all of this coming down to the wire. Because I'm going to tell you this right now. For once, it seems like the NFC really has Well, maybe not for once, but in comparison to last year, it seems like the NFC really has some very top quality teams that are going into the playoffs this year. Last year, it really didn't seem like there were any other quality NFC teams other than maybe the 49ers and the Eagles, and we can pretty much say that in the conference game, the Eagles permanently handled freaking the 49ers. Granted, of course, they were dealing with injuries, but that's besides the point. The point of the matter is that last year, the Eagles pretty much ran the table. There was not very many teams that were going to oppose them or put up a serious threat. But this year, it's a little bit different. So how do we talk about this? How do we set up this narrative? How do we start having this back and forth to try and figure out, can the Lions, number one, potentially get that number one seed? And also, what is the most likely, scenario? What's the most likely end of the year kind of playing out of all these games for the teams that have a shot to get that number one scenario? Because let's be fair here. The Lions are not the only team that could potentially pull off that number one seeding in the NFC. They're one of the more likelier teams, but that doesn't mean they're the only one. So in today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what I would consider the top teams in the NFC that have the best shot to get that number one seed. We're going to take a look at their remaining games, and then we're going to be like, okay, based upon my estimated prediction, again, I know some people are probably going to disagree with me on certain games, they're going to probably disagree with me on certain outcomes, they're going to have reservations, whatever term you'd like to use, but this is my most likely prediction of what could happen over the remaining 8 or so games that are left in the year. So without further ado, let's actually take a look at this. So, we're going to start with the Lions here because obviously that's the home team, my favorite team. That's the one we're going to talk about mostly on today's episode, obviously. When you take a look what the Lions have for the remainder of the year, their schedule for the most part is probably the easiest one out of all the NFC frontrunners or NFC likely teams that could make a run or a bid for that number one conference seed. Because let's think about this. If you take a look at the Lions' remaining 8 games, their next 2 games are at home against the Bears and Packers. In theory, and I'm going to say that quite a bit, in theory, the Lions should beat the Packers and the Bears pretty handily. Neither team is really good this year. They haven't really performed well. The Lions have already beat the Packers in primetime at their place. It should be a relatively good chance that the Lions are going to win both of those games. After that, they're on the road twice against the Saints and the Bears. The Saints game is going to be a really big one in my opinion because one, Dan Campbell's going back to New Orleans along with freaking Aaron Glenn because that's where those guys used to coach. And then on top of that, the Lions are going to be saying hi to an old friend of theirs in Jamal Williams. But again, should be a good game. I also expect the Lions should win that one. Then we play the Bears at their place. That's a game that I have some reservations about because it's late in the year. It's going to be outdoors. It's going to be cold. I don't know if this Lions team will get the win. I have, again, a good confidence that they should because, again, the Bears are not that good. Regardless of what Bears fans want to say, I still expect the Lions will sweep the Bears. I'm just expecting that game's probably going to be a little bit more close for comfort than what I want it to be. Then after those 2 games on the road versus the Saints and the Bears, we then have the Broncos at home. We should win that one. Again, the Broncos have been doing really good so far, but again, when we're at home, the Lions are just a completely different animal versus other teams. Now we get to the 2 games after the Broncos game that for me have the most likelihood to potentially screw the Lions up. And those are the 2 road games against the Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I think that the Lions should be able to sweep the Vikings. I really do. I know for a fact that there are people that are concerned about the Vikings, especially Lions fans, because Josh Dobbs has been playing very, very well for them at quarterback, and the Vikings are actually doing pretty well. They're on a 5-win streak right now. But again, I think this Lions team is good enough to sweep the Vikings and to potentially sweep the entire division this year and go 6-0. Again, remember, we went 5-1 in the division last year, and I think the Lions have a really good shot to go 6-0. I know that there are people that are worried about Josh Dobbs because he's a mobile quarterback. We haven't really done very good against mobile quarterbacks, but I think the Lions should be able to sweep both games against the Vikings, the one on the road and the one at home to finish out the year. However, though, the one game that I have virtually no confidence that we're going to win is the game in Dallas, because here's the problem I have. Whenever the Lions have gone to Dallas, we have not played very well in Dallas. It's just never happened. And the real thing I also have a problem with is that Dallas right now is playing very good on offense and very good on defense. However, though, The thing with the Cowboys is that their consistency level is all over the place. Sometimes they play really well. Sometimes they play like total dog crap. It just kind of depends on what day you catch them. Their consistency is not very, well, consistent. So, in my mind, if the Cowboys play like they are right now, I don't see the Lions winning. But again, that game is near the end of the year. That's in 7 games from now. A lot of stuff can change in 7 games. The Cowboys could get a whole bunch of injuries. The Cowboys could all of a sudden become dysfunctional. Who knows? But again, if we're basing everything off of right now, which is not exactly the most accurate way to do this, but it's all I have, I think the Lions will probably lose that game against the Cowboys, which, if you're doing your math right, that's only 1 loss over the remaining 8 games that we have, which, seeing as how we're 7-2, that would mean then we would finish the year with a 14-3 record. Now, that right there is very, very good because, number one, that would be the best record the Lions have had since 1991 when we got to the conference championship game. And it would be the best overall record that the Lions have had since 1953, which was when we won one of our championships back in the day when we went 10-2. So again, I think the Lions can finish 14-3 or 13-4, one of the cases, depending upon how you want to flip a game here or there. But I think it's more likely they finish 14-3 and have their best record of franchise history. Now, that's the Lions. The main contending body, the main contending team that is in the way of the Lions is by and large the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Philadelphia Eagles are a team that's very good. They have a lot of talent. They have a lot of really solid players. But the thing about the Eagles for me is this. Their schedule over the last 8 weeks, it is damn brutal. They do not get a break in terms of going up against good top-end talent until 3 weeks before the season is done. Because take a look at the next 5 games that the Eagles have. They're on the road against Kansas City. Then they're at home against the Bills and the 49ers. Then they're at the Cowboys. Then they're at the Seahawks. And then they finish the year with a game at home against the Giants and against the Cardinals. And then they travel to go play the Giants to finish out the year. Those first 5 games of the second half of the schedule, that's freaking brutal. That's a brutal stretch. Pardon me. I can't help emphasize how bad that is. But this is a team, the Eagles are a team that I think can handle that at least somewhat decently well. But realistically, I think that they have, in my opinion, 2 games in that 5-game stretch that they're most likely going to lose. The first one, I think they're going to lose the game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, the Chiefs are the Super Bowl defending champions. They did beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl last year, and in my opinion, I don't see any reason why the Chiefs can't do it, especially when they have Travis Kelce on the field, especially when they have Chris Jones on the field, especially when Patrick Mahomes is on the field. Again, I just think the Chiefs will be able to go out since they're at home. They should be able to get the dub there. So, that's the first game I think the Eagles lose out of their, remaining 8 games. The next game I think that they could lose is this one. And I know this is going to peeve off some Eagles fans, but here's the truth of the matter. For some reason, I have a sinking suspicion that when the Eagles go to play Dallas in Dallas, they could be in for a trap game. Because one of the things that I know is that whenever a division rival plays one another, and the Eagles and Cowboys are division rivals, it usually happens to where a team like Dallas, when you would think it would go for the Eagles, they all of a sudden just show up and they just put up fireworks. So for me, the 2 games that I have, in my opinion, that the Eagles will lose or have a likelier chance of losing over the last 8 games of the year is against the Super Bowl defending champion Chiefs when they're on the road at their place and when they're playing against Dallas in Dallas. So for me, that again is my most likely scenario, which coincidentally means that the Eagles would finish with the exact same record as the Detroit Lions with a 14-3 record. Some people might say that's highly coincidental, but again, I'm basing this off of what I think as far as teams, as far as talent, and again, just based off of what I'm seeing and just based off of logic. Now, there are other teams in the NFC that we need to consider here, and those are realistically the Cowboys, the 49ers, and the Seahawks. Those are the most other likely teams that have a potential, when I mean potential, kind of more like an outside shot of maybe doing something spectacular and pulling ahead and getting that number 1 seed. But again, I don't consider it very likely. I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt and including them in this video. When you take a look at the Cowboys, their record, for their last 8 games, they're at the Panthers, then they're at home 3 straight weeks for the Commanders, the Seahawks, and Eagles. Then they're on the road at the Bills, then they're on the road at Miami, then they play us at home, and then they finish the year at the Commanders. When I take a look at the Cowboys schedule, I think that they're likely going to lose their 2 games that they have on that remaining 8 against the Bills and Miami. And here's the reason why I think that. One, by the time the Cowboys go up to play the Bills, it's going to be snowing, it's going to be cold, and Dallas does not do very well in cold weather games because, well, they play in Dallas, they play in Texas a whole lot. So for them, cold weather is not their friend. And again, they play in a dome. Freaking the Bills are an outside open air team. So for me, I think they lose that one. And then when you consider Miami's offense this year has just been absolutely lights out. I think that game is going to be somewhat of a close game because you're going to be seeing a really top-end offense versus a top-end defense with the Cowboys. But we'll see what happens. But for me, those are the 2 likely games that the Cowboys lose, bringing their end of the season record to 12-5. Then you take a look at the 49ers, the next team after that. They, over their last 8 games of the year, they're at home against the Bucs, they're on the road against the Seahawks, on the road against the Eagles, they're at home against the Seahawks, then they're at the Cardinals, then they're at home against the Ravens, then they're at the Commanders, and then they finish the year at home against the Rams. So for them, they're kind of back and forth every week. But when I take a look at the 49ers, the 2 games that I have them losing is the game where they go to the Philadelphia Eagles and they play the Eagles at their place, and then when they're at home against the Ravens. Because, I'm sorry, again, the 49ers, they got throttled against the Eagles in the conference championship game last year. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, David, that was because Brock Purdy got injured and he couldn't play. But again, the way I'm looking at it is, one, the 49ers are going to be going to Philadelphia. They're going to be going up against a top team. They're going to be in Philadelphia's backyard. So for me, I got to give the advantage to the home team, but I, again, expect a really good game between those 2. And then, when I take a look at the Ravens, again, the Ravens have been playing very, very well this year. The fact that they lost pretty much on the last minute against the Cleveland Browns, I'm not going to hold that too much against them. But again, I think the Ravens go in and play against the 49ers. They play very well, and I think, again, it's going to be a close game, but that's the only other game on the 49ers schedule that I see a potential loss for them. So, again, like the Cowboys, they finished 12-5. And then the Seahawks, they're the one that I think kind of has the furthest outside shot. They could potentially do something, but I don't really give them much of a shot. The only reason I'm putting them on this list is because they're the only other NFC team that currently right now only has 3 losses on their schedule. Past that, it starts getting into 4 and 5, so I didn't figure I was going to put those teams in here. But when you take a look at the last 8 games that the Seahawks have, they're on the road at the Rams. Then they're at home against the 49ers. Then they're on the road against the Cowboys. Then they're on the road against the 49ers. Then they're home against the Eagles. Then they're at the Titans, home against the Steelers, and on the road against the Cardinals. I'm sorry here. Much like the Eagles, they have a really brutal schedule for pretty much 4 weeks in a row. And those are where I find all their losses, because I don't think they can beat the 49ers, even though they're at home. I don't think they're going to beat the Cowboys on the road. I don't think they're going to beat the 49ers on the road. And I don't think they're going to beat the Eagles at home. I'm just sorry. Those are top-tier teams. And while the Seahawks, they're a good team, they're not a top-tier team. Again, freaking what I predicted last year is kind of coming true. Geno Smith is kind of falling off a little bit. That's not saying he's playing terrible, but he's not playing to the same level he played last year. And again, when you start getting into these later weeks of the year, your quarterback has to really elevate his game, and Geno Smith has not done that. And for me, that poses a huge problem for the Seahawks. I still expect them to make the playoffs, but I don't really expect them to win against teams like the 49ers, Cowboys, and Eagles over the last final stretch of the season. So that, for me, has the Seahawks coming in at 10-7. Now, when I take a look at all that, like I said, I see the Eagles and the Lions finishing with the same record at 14-3. But here's the thing. The problem is I don't think the Lions even win the number 1 seed with that, because the problem is that the Eagles have, how do I put this? When you take a look at the Eagles and the Lions schedule, since they're going to be tied, in my theoretical opinion, that then means after that you have to go to the conference record, which means how the teams did against conference opponents. Well, here's the thing. Based upon what I am saying, The one thing I've realized is that the only way that the Lions are going to, in theory, leapfrog the Eagles is that there's got to be some crazy way where the Eagles lose 2 of the NFC conference games that they have for the remaining of the year. And unfortunately, I don't find it very likely because think about it. They have 5 games left in their schedule that are against NFC conference opponents. 2 of those games are against the Giants. They are not losing against the Giants. The Giants are a dumpster fire this year. So then it comes down to the Eagles having to either lose against the Cowboys, the 49ers, and the Seahawks. Now, 2 of those teams that I think that could potentially do it, I already said I think the Cowboys can beat them because that's a divisional game. And it's at Dallas. But the only other team out of those 2 between the 49ers and Seahawks that I think actually have a shot of beating the Eagles would be the 49ers because they're going to have Brock Purdy in that game. So the only way I see the Lions leapfrogging Philly is if they lose both games against the freaking Cowboys and the 49ers. I think they lose against Dallas, but I'm not so sure about the 49ers because of the fact that we haven't seen how Brock Purdy does against Philadelphia, number 1. But also number 2, Brock Purdy has also kind of looked a little vulnerable this year against other teams. He's looked a little bit better ever since then, but again, he's not the same Brock Purdy that was there last year when everybody's like, wow, this guy looks like another Tom Brady because he was a late round draft pick. For me, that's what's going to have to happen. The Eagles are going to have to lose against both the Cowboys and the 49ers to give the Lions that number 1 seed. Because if the Eagles do lose both of those games, their conference record falls to 9-2. Whereas the Lions' conference record would be 10-2, because if you take a look at all the conference games that the Lions have this year, they have 12. Well, think about it. We've already lost against the Seattle Seahawks. I'm predicting we're probably going to lose against Dallas. But all the other games that we have, that's 10 wins to the 2 losses. So we would have 1 more win than the Eagles, which would give us that number 1 seed. Now, again, I don't think that that's very likely to happen. However, though, while I'm saying it's not impossible, I'm saying it's improbable. But here's the one thing I'm going to end with before we end the episode in totality. You have to realistically debate the use of the bye week. Is it nice to have a bye week? Yeah, it is. It gives your team a chance to rest up. It also gives your team a chance to, get potentially players back that have been injured, so on and so forth. So that does help them. But the problem is until that freaking playoff game in the wild card is over, you don't really know who you're preparing against. So the bye week really doesn't help you in terms of preparation against an opponent, number 1. But number 2, you have to ask yourself this. Is it better to have the bye week to potentially get healthy, or is it better so that way when you get that potential number 2 to number 7 seed, which is the wild card games, to go straight into the playoffs and start playing against teams so that way you can actually start preparing for those other teams you're going to play against? Because think about this, folks. The only real advantage of having the number 1 seed other than the bye week is that you play at home the entire time through the playoffs. Well, if the Lions retain their number 2 seed currently, the only game that they wouldn't be at home for would be, in theory, if they got to the conference championship game, because they would have home field advantage for the wild card, and since they're the highest seed, they would also have home field advantage for the divisional round. So for me, having that number 2 seed versus that number 1 seed, the only real difference is that the Lions are not going to have home field advantage for the conference game, and they're not going to have a bye week, which for me, it's like, okay, that's a slight disadvantage, but this is a Lions team that I think doesn't really care about that. Would they like to have that number 1 conference seed? Yeah, I'm sure they would. But ultimately, for me, I don't really think that there's much difference for the Lions, whether it's number 2 or number 1. I'm sure some people would disagree with me, but that's what I personally feel. So again, while I don't think it's impossible that the Lions could pull off that kind of a surprise and actually capture the number 1 seed, I do think it is kind of improbable because of one, what kind of team the Eagles have, and also number 2, just based off of the schedule that the Eagles have, which is kind of, again, going to operate in their favor. Unless the Eagles completely collapse, which, again, I don't see that happening, I think that this is really going to come down to the Eagles are just going to have the better conference record, they're going to have the same total record as us, and that means they get the number 1 seed. But again, if there's one thing I know about the NFL is that it is constantly full of surprises and it never seems to disappoint when we start getting into the playoffs because there's always something crazy or wonky that happens at the end of the year that really kind of shakes things up. But we'll see what happens. I'm really rooting for the Lions to get that number 1 seed because that would really help them out as far as having home field advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs. But We'll see what happens. I'm not going to get upset if we have the number 2 seed. I would prefer to have number 1, but if we have number 2, I'm not going to cry about it either. But I figured I'd talk about this because this is something that we're really going to have to start paying attention to as the weeks go by and we get towards the end of the year. But it's kind of something to think about. It's kind of something to chew on, muddle a little bit over, and be like, could this or could this not potentially happen? So that was really the whole point of today's episode. But with that having been said, I just now want to say thank you all for watching the episode. Thank you all for everything that you guys do. And I just want to also say, pretty much for what I'm trying to get here is this. If you like what you saw, please, I highly encourage y'all, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you've subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you've not yet had a chance to do so, again, highly encourage y'all. Please subscribe. It helps me out immensely. But also, after you've subscribed, make sure you hit that bell notification icon that goes along with it so that way you never miss any more content that I push out. Again, subscription numbers always go up with every video that I release, but we want to make sure that you guys keep coming back for every time I have a new episode to release, so that way we can continue to have good conversations about football in general, but also about the Detroit Lions. I also want to encourage y'all to share this content with your Lions friends and family members to further help with that. Please, share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere that you can, and share it with everybody and anybody that you can. And with that, folks, I just want to again say thank you all for tuning into the show. Thank you all for your view, your support, your patronage, and I would also probably say your patience. This was a bit of a longer one for me. But with that being said, I also want to say thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your attention. I want to say God bless. Hopefully I earned your subscription if I hadn't had it before. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.